This isn't about Greenland. It's about who pays the bill when a government decides it needs something that isn't theirs. The narrative you're going to hear over the next few weeks is simple: national security, Arctic protection, strategic interests, historic allies, all very noble. But here's what nobody's telling you: you're paying for it. Not metaphorically, literally. And I'm going to show you exactly how, with 3 pieces of evidence that dismantle the official story. First evidence: the invisible cost. Every geopolitical move like this carries a price tag that never shows up in the headline but always shows up on your bill. Second evidence: the pattern. This has happened before. Same justification, same logic, same outcome. Third evidence: the precedent. What happens after this kind of action becomes normalized changes everything. And you're the one who bears the consequences. Over the next 20 minutes, you're going to see what's behind this story. No hysteria. No cheerleading, just incentives, costs, and trade-offs. Brutal clarity. Greenland is a massive island. 836,000 square miles. Population: 56,000. It's been a Danish territory for centuries. Technically autonomous since 1979, but Denmark still controls foreign policy and defense. It sits between North America and Europe, right at the top of the Arctic Circle. Here's what happened. Recent statements from U.S. officials suggest interest in acquiring control over the territory. Not subtle hints. Direct language about strategic necessity. The justification? Arctic routes are opening. Climate change is melting ice caps, new shipping lanes, rare earth minerals. Military positioning against rival powers. Denmark says it's not for sale. Greenland's local government is caught in the middle. And the conversation is being framed as a question of security and modernization. Why does this matter? Because Greenland controls access. Whoever holds that geography controls shipping routes worth trillions, mineral deposits the tech industry depends on, and radar coverage over the top of the world. It's a choke point. And choke points always become battlegrounds. But here's the thing nobody's asking. What does strategic interest actually mean when you strip away the language? It means someone wants something. And when governments want something, there's always a cost structure underneath, and that's where the story begins. Here's the story you're being told. Greenland is strategically vital. The Arctic is the new frontier. As ice melts, new shipping routes open up that cut thousands of miles off traditional paths between Asia and Europe. That's economic opportunity. That's efficiency. That's progress. Then there's the minerals. Rare earth elements. The kind you need for batteries, semiconductors, defense systems. Right now, a handful of countries control the global supply. Greenland has massive untapped reserves. Controlling that supply means energy independence. It means not relying on adversaries. It means securing the future of technology and defense. And then there's the military angle. Thule Air Base is already there, one of the most important radar and missile defense installations in the world. It watches the gap between continents. It tracks threats. It's a shield. If a rival power gains influence in the Arctic, that shield weakens. If they control shipping lanes, they control commerce. If they control minerals, they control supply chains. So the argument goes, this isn't imperialism. This isn't conquest. This is defensive. This is forward thinking. This is protecting American interests, and by extension, the interests of the free world. It's about stability. It's about preventing a vacuum. It's about making sure the good guys have the high ground. And when you frame it that way, it sounds reasonable. It sounds necessary. That's what you see. But here's the problem with every official narrative. It tells you what they want to do. It never tells you why they're actually incentivized to do it, and that's where the story flips. Strip away the language and look at the incentives. When a government says strategic interest, what they're really saying is, we want control over a resource, a route, or a position that generates power. Power means leverage. Leverage means the ability to shape outcomes, extract rents, and direct resources. Now ask yourself, who pays for that control? Not the people making the decision. Not the officials drawing up the plans. Not the agencies writing the reports. You do. Every military installation costs money to build and maintain. Every diplomatic negotiation costs money to fund. Every expansion of presence costs money to staff, supply, and defend. That money comes from taxes. It comes from debt. It comes from inflation when the debt gets too large to service. But here's where the incentive structure gets interesting. The people who benefit from control over Greenland are not the same people who pay for it. Defense contractors benefit. They get contracts to build bases, supply equipment, maintain infrastructure. That's revenue, that's profit. Political leaders benefit. They get to claim they've secured national interests. They get to frame themselves as strong, forward-thinking, protective. That's votes. That's legacy. Bureaucracies benefit. Every new strategic priority creates new agencies, new departments, new budgets. That's jobs. That's power. That's permanence, but the taxpayer gets the bill. And the taxpayer never gets to vote on whether the trade-off is worth it. This is the core mechanism that makes every strategic interest possible. Concentrated benefits, dispersed costs. The benefit flows to a small group who can lobby, influence, and profit. The cost spreads across millions of people who each pay a little bit, so no one feels it enough to resist. And that's not a bug. That's the design. Now here's the second layer. What happens when you control a choke point? You don't just benefit from the resource itself. You benefit from everyone else who needs access to it. If Greenland controls Arctic shipping lanes, whoever controls Greenland can set terms. They can charge fees. They can grant or deny passage. They can extract value from every ship, every company, every country that wants to use that route. If Greenland holds rare earth minerals, whoever controls extraction can set prices, limit supply, and dictate terms to industries that depend on those materials. That's not defense. That's leverage. That's rent-seeking on a geopolitical scale. And here's the kicker. You're not the one collecting the rent. You're the one paying to enforce the system that makes collecting rent possible. The cost of maintaining control bases, personnel, logistics, defense gets socialized. The benefit of exercising control contracts, influence, strategic advantage gets privatized. This is the incentive. This is what you're not being told. Now let me show you the proof. Proof 1. The cost structure is already in place, and you're already paying for it. Thule Air Base in Greenland isn't new. It's been there since 1951. It's one of the most remote military installations on Earth. Maintaining a base in the Arctic isn't cheap. Everything costs more. Fuel, food, equipment, personnel, it all has to be flown or shipped in. Temperatures drop to -40. Storms shut down operations for days. Infrastructure degrades faster. The Department of Defense doesn't publish line-item costs for individual bases. But we know the pattern. Remote installations cost multiples of what domestic ones do. Now here's what matters. When you expand strategic presence, you don't just pay for the expansion. You pay forever. A new runway isn't a one-time cost. It's maintenance, upgrades, staffing, fuel, security. Every year, compounding. A new radar installation isn't just hardware. It's personnel rotations, IT systems, encrypted communications, contractor support. Every year. This is how costs explode. Not in the headline, in the fine print, and who builds it. Defense contractors, who maintains it. Defense contractors, who supplies it. Defense contractors. In 2023, the U.S. announced a $200 million upgrade to Thule. That's public record. That's just upgrades to existing infrastructure. Now imagine what happens when the conversation shifts from maintain to expand. Imagine new installations, new ports, new logistical hubs to support Arctic operations, new icebreakers to patrol shipping lanes. Each one of those gets justified individually. Each one sounds reasonable in isolation. But stack them up and you're looking at tens of billions over a decade. Maybe hundreds, depending on scope, and none of it gets debated as a single decision. It gets broken into pieces, approved in separate budget lines, spread across agencies. That's how large-scale costs get hidden. Not by lying. By fragmenting. Here's the pattern. When a government identifies a strategic priority, the initial cost estimate is always low. Always. Because if the real number came out up front, it would never pass. So they lowball it. They get approval. They build the foundation. And then, 5 years later, they come back and say, we've already invested this much. We can't stop now. We need more funding to finish what we started. That's called lock-in. And it's not an accident. You're not just paying for Greenland. You're paying for the infrastructure, the commitments, the precedents, and the future costs that come with making it a priority. And the people who benefit from those contracts. They don't pay a dime. That's proof 1. The cost structure is real, it's documented, and it's designed to keep growing. Proof 2. This exact pattern has played out before. Same justification. Same incentive structure, same outcome. Let me give you 3 examples. The Philippines. Early 1900s. The justification, strategic location in the Pacific. Naval access. Trade routes to Asia, protecting American interests from rival empires. The result, decades of military presence, bases, infrastructure. Costs that balloon far beyond initial projections. And when the bases finally closed in the 1990s, the tab for building, maintaining, and defending them had run into the tens of billions. Who paid? Taxpayers. Who benefited? Defense contractors, shipping companies, and politicians who could claim they'd secured the Pacific. Next example, the Middle East. Post-World War II. The justification. Oil, strategic resources. Preventing Soviet influence. Stabilizing a region critical to global energy. The result, permanent military presence. Bases in multiple countries. Carrier groups, logistics hubs. The cost of maintaining that presence? Trillions. Not over 1 year, over decades. And here's the key, it never ends. Every time there's a threat, real or perceived, the answer is more presence, more funding, more commitment. The pattern is always the same. Identify a strategic interest, justify initial costs as defensive, build infrastructure, lock in future spending, expand when new threats emerge. Third example, the Arctic itself. This isn't even the first time. During the Cold War, the US and its allies poured billions into Arctic infrastructure, radar lines, early warning systems, bases across Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Iceland. The justification then, Soviet bombers, missile threats, the gap between continents. The threat was real. But the response created a cost structure that lasted 50 years. Some of that infrastructure is still in use today. Still being funded, still being upgraded. And now the justification is shifting. It's not Soviet bombers anymore. It's Chinese shipping routes, it's Russian mineral claims. It's climate change opening new passages. Different threat, same mechanism. Here's the turn. This isn't a one-time decision about Greenland. This is a pattern. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Every strategic priority follows the same arc. Step 1. Identify a threat or opportunity. Frame it as existential. Step 2. Justify initial costs as necessary and temporary. Step 3. Build infrastructure that creates long-term commitments. Step 4. Expand when new threats emerge, using the sunk cost as leverage. We've already invested so much. We can't walk away now. Step 5. Repeat. The costs compound. The commitments become permanent. And the people making the decisions never pay the price. This isn't about whether Greenland is strategically important. Maybe it is. This is about whether the people pushing for control face the same incentives as the people funding it. They don't. And when decision makers don't bear the cost of their decisions, they make different choices than they would if they did. That's not a conspiracy. That's basic economics. So when you hear we need Greenland for national security, don't ask if it's true. Ask, who benefits, who pays, and what happens after the first check gets written? Because the historical record is clear. The first check is never the last. Proof 3. The precedent this sets changes the rules of the game. And when the rules change, the costs multiply. Let's talk about what happens when territorial acquisition becomes normal again. For the last 75 years, there's been an understanding fragile, inconsistent, but real that you don't just take territory because you want it. You don't annex land because it's strategically useful. That norm wasn't created out of kindness. It was created because 2 world wars taught everyone that territorial expansion triggers escalation. And escalation costs more than any strategic advantage is worth. But norms are only as strong as the incentive to follow them. The moment one major power decides a norm doesn't apply to them, every other major power starts calculating whether it applies to them either. If the US decides Greenland is too important to leave under Danish sovereignty, what stops China from deciding Taiwan is too important to leave autonomous? What stops Russia from deciding the Baltics are too important to leave independent? You can argue those situations are different. Maybe they are. But the principle is the same. Strategic interest justifies control. And once that principle is back on the table, the question isn't whether it gets used again. The question is how many times. Here's the cost you're not seeing. Every time that principle gets invoked, it triggers a response. Not just diplomatic. Military. If China sees the US expanding its footprint in the Arctic, they accelerate their own Arctic ambitions. More icebreakers, more research stations, more territorial claims. If Russia sees NATO presence expanding in Greenland, they reinforce their northern bases. More submarines, more missile deployments, more patrol routes. That's not paranoia. That's incentive response. When one side moves, the other side has to match or fall behind. And every move costs money. Your money. So it's not just the cost of controlling Greenland. It's the cost of the arms race that controlling Greenland triggers. Now let's talk about the domestic precedent. When a government decides it needs something for national security, debate gets sidelined. You can't question it without being accused of undermining defense. You can't push back without being framed as naive or unpatriotic. That shuts down cost-benefit analysis. It shuts down oversight. It shuts down the question every taxpayer should be asking. Is this worth what we're paying for it? And once that precedent is set, it gets reused, over and over. Every new priority becomes a national security issue. Every new spending request becomes non-negotiable. The Pentagon wants a bigger budget? National security. The intelligence agencies want expanded surveillance? National security. A new foreign commitment? National security. The label does all the work. And the cost keeps climbing. Here's what that looks like in practice. In 2001, the defense budget was $300 billion. By 2011, it was $700 billion. By 2023, it was over $800 billion. That's not inflation. That's mission creep. Every new priority adds to the baseline. And baselines never go down. Greenland becomes another line item. And 10 years from now, when someone asks why the budget is $100 billion higher, Greenland will be part of the explanation, along with a dozen other priorities that all sounded necessary at the time. Now here's the final consequence. What this does to resources. Every dollar spent on Arctic expansion is a dollar that doesn't go somewhere else. That's opportunity cost. It's a dollar that doesn't fix a bridge, doesn't fund a school, doesn't lower a tax rate, doesn't reduce the debt. You can argue that national security is more important than those things. Maybe it is. But that's a trade-off. And trade-offs require honesty about what you're giving up. The problem is, the people making the decision don't feel the trade-off. They're not choosing between a base in Greenland and fixing infrastructure in their own community. They're just approving a budget line. The cost gets spread so thin that no individual feels it enough to object. And that's the system. Concentrated benefits. Diffuse costs. Decisions made by people who don't pay the price. So here's proof 3. This isn't just about Greenland. It's about what Greenland represents. A precedent. A signal. A shift back toward a world where strategic interest justifies expansion and expansion justifies unlimited cost. And in that world, you're always the one paying the bill. Let's bring this together. 3 pieces of evidence. 3 things they're not telling you. 1. The cost structure. Every strategic expansion comes with a price tag that never stops growing. Initial estimates are always low. Long-term commitments are always expensive. And you're the one funding it through taxes, through debt, through inflation. 2. The pattern. This has happened before. Philippines, Middle East, Cold War, Arctic infrastructure. Same justification. Same incentive structure. Same result. Costs that balloon. Commitments that never end. Benefits that flow to contractors and decision makers. Bills that land on taxpayers. 3. The precedent. When territorial acquisition becomes acceptable again, every rival power starts making the same calculation. That triggers responses. Arms races, escalation, and every move costs more money. Your money. Meanwhile, domestically, national security becomes the label that shuts down debate and locks in spending that never goes down. This isn't about whether Greenland is important. Maybe it is. This is about the incentive structure underneath every decision like this. When the people who benefit from a decision don't pay the cost, they make different choices than if they did. That's the test. That's the lens. Every time you hear strategic interest, ask 3 questions. Who benefits? Who pays? And what happens after the first check gets written? Because the answer is almost always the same. The benefits concentrate. The costs disperse, And the system is designed that way. That's not cynicism. That's clarity. Here's the principle. When you separate decision-making from cost-bearing, you don't get better decisions. You get more decisions, more commitments, more spending. Less accountability, and that applies to everything. Not just Greenland. Every foreign intervention, every new priority, every expansion of government power. The mechanism is always the same. So here's my question for you. If you had to personally write the check for every strategic priority your government pursues, which ones would you actually approve? Think about it. Leave your answer in the comments, because that's the conversation nobody wants to have, but it's the only one that matters.